Hey, how's it going everyone? It's been a while since my last video, and as of the making of this video, I'm still rereading through One Piece to gather as much information as possible for some content I want to make in the near future. However, I didn't want to keep you guys waiting for too long, so I decided to make this video as a response to all the comments I received regarding the topic of verse equalization. Now, I want to make one thing clear. Verse equalization is a fan-made term, so there isn't exactly a singular and agreed upon definition for this term. I've looked everywhere to try and find a proper definition, but people seem to have minor discrepancies with the way they define this term. Now, before I get ahead of myself, I think we should first try to define what verse equalization is. From what I gathered, it is primarily a set condition within a cross-verse battle where the energies or power systems of two specific verses are equalized, usually through some comparison so that the characters can affect one another as they normally would in their own respective verse. In other words, Haki equals chakra equals nen equals ki equals reiatsu, and you get the point. This is a common condition that people like to set upon their cross-verse debates, since it could be used to simplify the conversation. It also allows characters to be capable of wielding their entire toolkits and certain abilities that were originally designed to only be used within the context of their story. For example, chakra is a relatively complex power system. Within the context of the verse, there are many powerful abilities that require the opponent to have chakra or use chakra-based attacks. The Rinnegan, one of the most powerful ocular jutsu, has the ability to absorb ninjutsu and chakra. A user of the Predapath can utilize this ability to virtually negate not only 1/3 of the power system, but the most commonly used form of the power system, ninjutsu. It sounds extremely powerful on paper, and it's one of the more terrifying abilities within the verse. Through verse equalization, this ability could hypothetically be used to absorb energy-based attacks from other verses like the Kamehameha. Now, I'm sure many people would agree that this is the correct way to discuss a versus battle. Both characters would hypothetically have the entire use of their toolkit, and it could help simplify what could possibly be a very complex battle. However, I completely disagree with this idea, and I believe verse equalization, if anything, makes cross-verse debates both unfair and more complicated than they already are. I want to make a couple of things very clear. There isn't a singular correct way of making cross-verse battles. There aren't any laws written that state what characters can or can't be used, or what conditions can or can't be placed. Cross-verse battles are nothing more than thought experiments. You can have Pikachu versus Omnimon, Goku versus Superman, Daffy Duck versus Madara, or Farmer with a Shotgun versus Teiuchi, the Sage of the Six Bowls. And you can add whatever conditions you'd like, because ultimately, these thought experiments are just for fun. Unless you have a situation like the creators of The Boys and Invincible agreeing that Omni-Man absolutely curb stomps Homelander, any results one gets from a versus battle is ultimately just an opinion. That's not to say that these opinions aren't valid or educated guesses, since they could have been formed through research and power scaling. Every video, discussion, or forum that entails two or more characters from different stories fighting one another are just opinions, and that's completely fine. One last thing I want to add is that depending on what conditions are added to a cross-verse battle, the outcome can drastically change. Speed equalization, what terrain the characters are fighting on, whether or not a character can use their powers, hand-to-hand combat only, the list goes on. Any set condition can have a drastic change on the fight's outcome, so something as simple as verse equalization can make or break a matchup. Whether or not one chooses to equalize the verses, it's ultimately just another condition. There is no right or wrong. For those who believe that verse equalization is mandatory and any debate that doesn't include it is otherwise null and void, get over yourselves. So why do I dislike it so much? My short answer would be that it just makes battles feel disingenuous. Before I elaborate, I want to give you a glimpse into my thought process. I have always been a curious person. I like to ask a lot of questions to get a better idea of how something works and why someone may or may not like/enjoy something. That curiosity eventually brought me to the niche pop culture community of power scaling and cross-verse battles. In my mind, the most fair and honest way to establish a winner is by putting two characters in an open field as if they were instantly put there with no environmental advantages for either side, and to keep the characters as close to their personality as possible. How would these characters fare against one another, and how would their abilities interact given their explicit differences? Would one be able to overcome the other's abilities? I bet some are thinking that that's where verse equalization comes in and simplifies the thought experiment, but that's exactly where I disagree. Take Asta from Black Clover as an example. He has the ability to wield and use anti-magic, which nullifies other forms of magic. He can break spells, defend against magic-based attacks, he can undo curses, and can even deflect some attacks back at the opponent. Within the context of his verse, Asta's anti-magic is an extremely powerful ability to wield because it's effectively a counter to the entire power system. Against characters like Naruto, Ichigo, or Goku, Asta's ability to use anti-magic becomes a lot less impressive and effective because they don't have magic. Asta wouldn't be capable of guarding himself as effectively against a Getsuga Tensho. He also wouldn't be capable of deflecting a Rasen Shuriken back at Naruto because their power systems neither involve magic or function mechanically the same. Through verse equalization, this wouldn't be a problem since Asta can now affect their abilities like he normally would with magic. This is my first problem with verse equalization. While some may believe that this evens out the playing field since Asta can now fight like he normally would in his verse, Naruto and Ichigo have been indirectly nerfed because they don't benefit as much as Asta. None of Naruto's or Ichigo's abilities explicitly require the opponent to have chakra or reiatsu for them to function properly. The outcome of the fight could drastically change because Asta now has a way of nullifying most of their abilities. In a similar regard, we have the Rinnegan's Predapath. Since there isn't a limit to how much chakra one could absorb, through verse equalization, it can now absorb any energy-based attacks sent at the user. Goku could shoot a Kamehameha at a Rinnegan user and they can now completely absorb it, whereas without verse equalization, they would simply take the hit. As for Logia Devil Fruit users and Haki, Logia users are virtually intangible because their bodies literally become elements. Be it fire, light, ice, or mud, the user's body can't be hurt by conventional attacks. Haki is the most effective countermeasure against Logia users because it has the ability to solidify the opponent. Within the context of its verse, most opponents struggle to combat Logia Devil Fruit users because they don't have the means or knowledge to deal with such a powerful passive ability. And yet through verse equalization, this strong defensive ability now gets completely countered by any character who uses an energy-based power system. I feel like people don't often consider the context behind many broken abilities within their favorite verses. The Rinnegan, Anti-Magic, Logia Devil Fruits, and even Genjutsu were all designed to be used or limited within the context of their stories. Take away that context through verse equalization and they become either much more powerful or much weaker. Speaking of power systems, verse equalization essentially ignores the individual and unique mechanics of each power system by simplifying it. Take Genjutsu for example. It normally works by manipulating the chakra in an opponent's cerebral nervous system to make them see illusions through the five senses. Chakra flows through the chakra network, which is a physical series of vessels that are intertwined within all of the organs and muscles. As powerful as Genjutsu may be within the context of the Narutoverse, it's virtually useless outside of it because characters outside of the Narutoverse don't have chakra or a chakra network. Another example would be the Gentle Fist, which is used in conjunction with the Byakugan to both see the opponent's chakra network and then shut down their chakra points by directly attacking said points to impede chakra flow. However, against an opponent without a chakra network, these styles of combat become a lot more inefficient. Verse equalization may cause these abilities to become more effective, but it ultimately just benefits one character over another. If Asta doesn't have chakra or a chakra network, why should he be affected by abilities that require it like Genjutsu or the Gentle Fist? If Ace is made out of literal fire, why should Asta be capable of cutting him if his abilities don't come from magic? If one looks at it from the perspective of a single character, it may seem fair that their abilities are more effective now because of verse equalization, but it'll be at the cost of the other character's toolkit or abilities. I mentioned earlier that verse equalization is used to hypothetically simplify a possibly complex cross-verse battle. In truth, I believe that if anything, it makes battles much more complicated. If you want to have a simple debate without getting too meta about the arguments or possible interactions, then I can probably see it as a good thing. But ultimately, if you're going to have an extensive analysis about the characters, their abilities, feats, statements, and narrative to generate a more in-depth opinion, then verse equalization just causes more arguments made from headcanon. Take chakra and haki for example. If you remove all context and mechanics from these power systems and oversimplify them, then all you get is an energy source made internally by the user that can improve one's physical prowess. But that's not all the chakra and haki are, now is it? My point is that one cannot simply ignore all of the mechanical differences between both power systems just because at the most basic level, they're slightly similar. For example, in Naruto, if a shinobi completely runs out of chakra, then they die. In One Piece, characters can run out of haki and continue to live. If you equalize the verses, would running out of haki unalive the user, or would running out of chakra not mean death? I'm sure there are people who would agree with either answer, but ultimately it's just headcanon at that point. It may not come up in every battle regarding both verses, but if, for example, a Rinnegan user grabbed a haki user and drained them of all of their haki, would the haki user die? Here is another example, and if you want to play along, then just pause the video. Ace launches his Fire Fist at a Rinnegan user. Would they be able to absorb it or take the hit? If you ask me, it depends entirely on what exactly is being equalized, because either haki equals chakra or chakra equals devil fruits. Haki and devil fruits are two completely separate power systems within the same verse. Let's try one more. Gojo is fighting Asta. Their battle begins and he reveals the Six Eyes. For context, the Six Eyes allow the user to read a target's curse technique and determine its function. Under verse equalization, would Gojo be capable of deducing Asta's anti-magic and how it functions? I'll give you guys a second to pause the video. I'm sure anyone can make an argument for why any of these answers could be the correct choice. However, it's ultimately just headcanon. There is no set precedent to formulate an opinion. Verse equalization causes so many more arguments to be made entirely out of headcanon. It's not as simple as saying that both power systems work how they normally would within their own verse, because for that to happen, they would have to function mechanically the same. If that has to be the case, then it brings up even more questions. Could Asta negate Naruto's Kurama cloak with his sword slashes? If Gojo saw Deku's quirk with the Six Eyes, would he be capable of deducing all of One For All's quirks, or just the ones he sees being used? If Itachi looked at Asta with his base Sharingan, could he put Asta in a genjutsu even through anti-magic? How would it interact with anti-magic? If Kisame swings Samehara at Gojo, would it bypass Limitless since it eats any and all chakra? If Sukuna fought Gohan, would he be capable of learning how to fly just by watching him? Would Neji be capable of shutting down Yuji's cursed energy by using the Gentle Fist? Would Haki be capable of going through Gojo's Limitless if cursed techniques equal devil fruits? Would Goku be capable of ignoring Limitless since he's so much stronger than Gojo? Without verse equalization, all of those questions that may or may not come up are very easy to answer, because the answer is simply no. I feel like the biggest point of contention that people have is that they believe that without it most attacks wouldn't do anything, but that isn't the case. Even if you don't equalize the verse, Naruto's Rasen Shuriken is still going to function exactly the same. It just won't be targeting the opponent's chakra network. Asta can still swing a big heavy sword to bonk his opponents and send out flying anti-magic slashes. Gojo's Limitless can still stop most attacks that don't have spatial manipulation. In my opinion, you get a more fair and concrete way of determining the winner in a battle that doesn't involve having to agree to headcanon. Just because one character uses ki and another uses nen doesn't mean their entire toolkits are useless. The only abilities that may be rendered useless are those that specifically require the opponents to have the same power system. They can still hurt one another just fine. What drastically changes is the way that many hacks' abilities may function or interact. So if verse equalization, at least to me, feels disingenuous, then what makes no verse equalization any better? I'll use an example from my previous videos, and I'll add a couple new ones just to give you a better idea. The simple answer is that it gives you an arguably more concrete idea of how the fight should go. For starters, I've had a lot of people argue that having no verse equalization in the Kaido vs Madara video is biased towards Kaido. Madara now can't use genjutsu to affect Kaido. He also can't absorb Kaido's energy attacks with the Predapath. My question is, why should he be allowed to use genjutsu against Kaido? He's not fighting a shinobi, he's not fighting someone who has chakra or a chakra network. I don't think I'm being biased in saying that an ability that requires a specific internal organ that aligns the entire body shouldn't work on a character who doesn't have said organ. You can argue all you want about Madara being capable of injecting his chakra into Kaido with the Sharingan. That chakra can't flow anywhere because there is no chakra network. It's inherently unfair to Kaido because he does not benefit from verse equalization the same way Madara does, and Madara doesn't really use the Predapath or genjutsu that often to begin with. Madara would still have the entirety of his toolkit and would only be limited in using 2 of his abilities. But through verse equalization, now Kaido is not only affected by genjutsu, but now 2 of his energy-based attacks can be absorbed. Let's take a look at Six Paths Naruto. One of the benefits of Six Paths Senjutsu is that it grants the user immunity to the effects of ninjutsu. In a versus battle where chakra equals insert power system, Naruto would be completely immune to every ki blast and energy attack. The only way to hurt a Six Path Senjutsu user is through the application of Taijutsu or Senjutsu. If the verses are equalized, then that would technically mean that any energy-based attack Naruto is hit with is essentially the same as ninjutsu. Because of verse equalization, this means that Naruto is effectively immune against most energy-based attacks. At that point, one would also have to add stipulations to make it so that energy-based attacks would work on Naruto, or they would have to be somehow equalized to Senjutsu. Another example would be Ace versus Deku. Ace is essentially an element and virtually intangible. Deku going through the trouble of hitting Ace is part of what makes Logia users so hard to deal with. How does one punch fire? If you equalize the verses and set quirks equal Haki, now Ace's entire ability is completely countered by One For All or any of its sub-quirks. Only Deku benefits from this, and Ace's abilities are inherently nerfed. In the same vein, why should Gojo's Limitless be countered instantly by Asta's anti-magic slashes? Why should a Rinnegan user be capable of absorbing magic attacks or Nen abilities? Why should Asta's anti-magic work against beings that don't use magic? If a character doesn't inherently have a way of bypassing an ability, or if one of their abilities requires the other person to have a specific energy source from their power system, then that's their problem. Their opponents shouldn't be inherently nerfed because they don't have a way to interact in the first place. These characters are not fighting opponents from their own verse. Each verse and power system has its own set of rules. The point of a cross-verse battle is to see how they would do against characters outside of their verse with toolkits that they'll have to overcome. Why should their power system reliant abilities be just as effective against characters that aren't from the same verse? With all that being said, I want to make it very clear. I am not going to use verse equalization in any of my one-on-one cross-verse videos. For the type of content I want to make, it simply doesn't work. But that doesn't mean I won't be using it to make videos like my Big Mom versus the Hidden Leaf video. If you like the video or just like hearing me yap about stuff, then I would really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. I've got a lot of projects I want to work on in the near future. With that being said, thank you all so much for watching. Peace out.